this lesson, I'm going to show you how you can use the HTTP post method to actually create a new user. In order to do that, we can copy and paste our server.get function. The one thing I always like after creating our first API call is that you can use a lot of copy and paste at this point. And once again, we are going to say that the header is application JSON. The response code again is going to be 200, but the HTTP method that we are going to use when creating a new user is post. And this is standard in RESTful APIs. Get is for retrieving information about a user. Post is for creating a new user. Something called put is used for updating user information. And finally, the HTTP delete method is going to be used for deleting a user. But because we're adding a user, we can use post, and let's go and fetch the data about our new user. So we can say var user is equal to rec.params. That's saying that in our HTTP request, the parameters that come in are going to define our new user. So this is going to be an array of parameters, and thus var user is going to be an array. And then, because we have our max user ID currently set to 0, let's give this user a new ID. So we're going to increment our max user ID. We'll say that the ID of our new user is whatever the current max user ID is. In our users array, which consists of all the users, let's say that the key for this particular user is going to be his unique user ID, and the data is going to be the user array that we collected from our request. And don't worry, we're going to step through this once again once we actually issue the call in Postman. So now what we can actually do is make sure that the response is sent correctly. So to do that, again, the response will be application JSON, HTTP code 200, and I'll copy and paste this line from our GET request. And this time we're going to respond with the information about the particular user, single user, that we've just added to our user array database. So to step through this once more, let's take our request object, which we have access to by default with Restify. We're going to take the parameters of this request object, increment our counter, set the new user's ID, this guy, to the max user ID. We're going to add this user to our array of all users, and then respond with a JSON string consisting of information for this particular user. Now, this actually won't quite work yet, and the reason is we have to add a few lines before our server route declarations to say server.use. And in the next lesson, I'm going to go into more detail about how this works, but let me just write it out quickly for this lesson to say that server.use restify accept parser. Again, don't worry if you don't fully understand what this is doing at this point. Acceptable. And then we'll copy and paste that and say server.use restify.body parser. And last but not least, the URL that we want to have is going to be /user, which means that if a post occurs to the /user URL endpoint, then this code is going to be executed. So let's head over to Postman and see if we did this correctly without any errors. This time we're going to issue a post request to the user endpoint, and our body, which can be accessed via this tab, we're going to say that the first name of our user is Jim, let's say. The last name of our user is test, and the email address of this particular user is jim@test.com. So if I issue a post request, it's taking a few seconds. I'm going to show you that the server is still running via NodeMon. And it looks like something might have gone wrong. So it looks like the one typo that we made is right here. This is supposed to be a function, actually. Restify.bodyParser. And if we head back now and issue a request to post user with our data, we see that we get a response consisting of the information that we entered. And if we were to go ahead and run that again, you'll notice that this ID changed from 1 to 2. And this is because we actually just added 2 users to our user array database. And if I were to issue a GET request to localhost 8080, here we see that now we get our 2 users that we just added. The information is the same except for this ID parameter that has been incremented by our code. So that's it for this lesson, and stay tuned for the next lesson.